Xin chào, as they say here in Viet Nam. This is going to be somewhat of a free-formed monologue by me. Those of you who may followed along with my notes and various articles may remember that I'm co-writing a book at the moment on perimenopause. I can't tell you the title of the book yet, simply because it's an absolute bottler of a title, and I don't want someone to steal it and put out a book before I do. So it's a great title. You're going to love it when it comes out, but I can't tell you that. But I can tell you that a fellow psychologist who is going through perimenopause herself at the moment, and I are writing a book about perimenopause. Now, why would a man write a book about perimenopause? Well, because I'm the other half of the equation. Perimenopause doesn't just happen to women. It happens to everyone that they come into contact with as well. And that includes my wife and other people's partners and my wife's children and everyone's family and friends and work colleagues and everything. So perimenopause is something that happens to 50% of the world's population, but impacts 100%, I would argue, of the world's population. Okay, so my wife and I were having dinner at a restaurant here in Dalat the other night, and we were talking, and a friend of hers, a dear friend of hers, was apparently relayed to her a story about a woman here who'd been happily married for 20 odd years, a Vietnamese woman married to a Westerner, happily married for 20 odd years, and then suddenly out of the blue finds out he's having an affair with a younger model. And she's heartbroken. And the dominant, how Hung explained it to me, my wife, and the dominant cultural model here amongst women, I understand, is that men are predatory, and so men always do this. They always go and they get bored and they go and find a younger, prettier something, or woman to have intimate time with, shall we say. And I brought to that discussion something a little bit different, something that comes from the counselling room for decades, and something that I've discussed with other counselling colleagues, and the literature explains in that yes, some men are predatory like that, and it's some and my wife and the culture here are right that it's to do with power. But I explained to my wife that the picture that all men do this is extremely erroneous. We can look around the number of Western men that I know here in Dalat, for example, and I probably know 25 or 30 Western men who live here who are either married or in long-term relationships with Vietnamese women, and only one of them behaves like this. He's well known within the community, and he behaves like this. So even though he's married, he will have girlfriends, unbeknownst to his wife, or he's had several wives here. So yes, there is evidence to say that this model that men are predatory and they run off and have an affair, midlife crisis and all that sort of thing. Get the sports car, get the BMW, get the hot girlfriend, the mistress, the concubine, if you will, to bring it back to olden terms. And yes, there is evidence, but the vast majority of evidence points to something else. And this is where I'm free-forming, because this video will also go to my colleague Gay, who's in Brisbane, a different part of the world, back in Australia for me. We're talking about this because she's going through it, and she's had to go through lots of learnings herself. So there's a few things I want to address. The first one is that the men are predatory and they were going after the younger, fitter model because that's what midlife crisis men do, and that's just not borne by the evidence. As I explained to my wife, you have to look at what's happening at home. as to why men go and do that. Because, as I explained to her, men are incredibly easy to manage. We are so simple and easy to manage. And I don't understand why women think that men are so difficult, because we're not. We're so easy to manage. We're so simple to manage. And the Filipino women know this, and they've known this for, I don't know, decades, generations, perhaps. And as far as I understand from talking to Filipinos that I used to work with back in Australia, but also Filipinos that I've met here, and watching Filipinos videos on YouTube, that Filipino women are taught a basic thing. It's handed on from Filipino to Filipina about how to keep a Western man. And that is to keep his stomach full and his balls empty. And as long as you do that, he's very unlikely to stray. Now, I would add in a third wrinkle to that, and I would say, don't be boring. So my wife, for example, when we first started, dating, she was very concerned because the cultural myth amongst women, the story amongst women about men and Western men in particular, is that we will get ourselves a wife, and after 2 years we'll be bored with her and we'll push her aside and get a younger, trimmer, fitter, curvier model. And the evidence here just does not bear that out. One man does that, but the rest, every other expat man that I know who's in a long-term relationship doesn't do that. They stay with their wives, and you have to ask why. But that's their story to tell, not mine. But the Filipinos, we'll go back to the Filipinos. Filipinos have a very good vested interest in landing and keeping a Western man. And that comes back to simple economics. The Filipinos are dirt poor in the main, and they usually have got children to support. The father of the children, for whatever reason, either won't or can't support them financially, and so it's up to the woman and her family, her extended family, to raise and feed and look after and clothe the children. So along comes a Westerner with the economic disparity that a Westerner brings into a local culture, and of course he's an attractive target. So I can understand why the Filipinos are pretty clued up as far as they're concerned on how to keep a Western man. And as I said before, that's ask any Filipina and she'll tell you that the easiest way to keep a Western man is to keep his stomach full and his balls empty. And I add the third wrinkle, that is, don't be boring. But it's very... Even autistic men find it. Autistic men get great pleasure in having routine and having the same thing. And men, ask any woman, most men are quite lazy. We don't go out looking for adventure if we're happy at home. We just don't do that. So, like I explained to my wife, you have to look at what's happening in the home to figure out why perhaps this man, after 20 years, and the wife very, very happy, he's not. Now, he may be telling her, because as gentlemen, we're raised to tell, to not raise problems, to keep things quiet, to have happy wife, happy life. And so we're not raised to challenge women and say, hey, look, I'm not happy about this. Can we try something different? And so we basically we're taught to treat women like princesses and like queens, and so not to challenge and not adjust and seek adjustment, and just to go along, not. And so when a woman hits the perimenopause stage, and this is, yes, I'm bringing it back into perimenopause. When the woman hits the perimenopause stage and her body is, as I view it, trying to kill her from the inside, but in strict terms, her body is transitioning from the child-bearing phase into the no longer need to raise children and give birth to children phase. In some cultures, particularly matriarchal cultures, the sort of third phase where women are actually revered and respected for the fact they've got through all of that. And so, as I said, this is a long rambling thing, so I apologise that this is long and rambling and I'm just making shit up as I go along. But so when a woman hits the menopausal period and the body just like revolts and goes, we're not playing this anymore. The structures and the chemistry that you had inside of you, the hormones that you had inside of you that enabled you to put up with shit no longer support you. And so suddenly, you know, women find themselves unable to put up with what they put up with before. And they turn, all of a sudden they turn. And you know, I'm not making this up. The literature is out there. You ask any perimenopausal woman, and the literature, and you know, I'm not making this shit up. So the women change, and they don't understand why they're changing. They don't understand. You listen to talkback radio, and I've listened to quite a bit of talkback radio in Australia around this topic because I'm interested in this topic. And so many callers ring in to talkback radio and say, look, I don't know what I've become, but I don't like what I've become. I don't like the human being that I am that's interacting with my family. My children don't like me anymore. My husband doesn't like me anymore. I snap. I'm mean. I'm nasty. I'm cruel. And that's not me. But it is you. But it's just you under a different chemical banner. You were shielded from that, and now your chemicals no longer shield you. Your hormones no longer shield you from that. So you stop, and so you suddenly get the situation where we get in the West, where, you know, women of a certain age initiate divorces, and the men are completely blindsided by it. You know, there's some huge statistic in America, and I've not got the numbers off the top of my head, but in the West, not just America, you know, the number of divorces that are initiated by women is very, very large. And the vast majority of men are completely blindsided for it. They thought, you know, life and marriage was going along fine. The wife was fine. And suddenly she's filing for divorce. And the same thing happened to me. After 14 years of marriage, my wife suddenly turned around one day and said, I want a divorce. And, you know, when I was completely dumbfounded, and I asked her eventually when I sort of recovered my senses, I asked why, and she said, we have nothing in common anymore. And I couldn't argue with the logic of it. It's true, we didn't. But it took me until recently, and you know, talking through with Gay, my co-writer, and various other people, realizing that no, it was the perimenopause that had made her decide that she wanted a divorce, because she wanted change, because she wasn't happy with how things were, and she wanted change. Even though she was very successful at work, even though she was very respected, as far as I understand, at work, no, she wanted change. And you know, I was the easy target. So she got the divorce. Not heard from her since the day I moved out, basically. And that was, you know, quite a few years ago. So the idea that, you know, to go back to the first point, that men, you know, go out and you know, there is a 1% of maybe, you know, a power-hungry, you know, man. But for every one man, there's probably hundreds of men who do not do that. So, you know, that myth needs to be put to rest. Now, the challenge that I face here in Vietnam is that Vietnam doesn't really understand menopause, let alone perimenopause. Menopause, as I explain in Gay and my book about perimenopause, is that, you know, men are not taught what the hell's going on. It's just a word that gets bandied around, menopause. And we're told that it's women's business, and not to, you know, question it or try and find out about it. It's women's stuff, and if they want you to know, they'll tell you. And then, you know, further investigation finds out that the women aren't told what menopause really is. It's just, you know, a woman's problem. And so their mothers will tell them, oh, it's just something you have to endure, and, you know, there'll be hot sweats and cold and all sorts of mood swings and things. But that's about all they're told. And so, because there's no vocabulary for it. The vocabulary for perimenopause is only just starting to come through now. So women are finding the words to be able to explain what their thoughts and feelings are. But certainly that's in the West. It's not here in Vietnam. And I can give you a concrete example of that. because when Gay and I were writing this book, and when the first chapter, we were drafting the first chapter together, and we'd send drafts back and forth to each other, and toss ideas around. And when I got one part of the first chapter, which is mainly Gay's chapter, introducing, what perimenopause and why she's particularly well skilled to write about it. She put down on, in print or on paper, what her symptoms had been through perimenopause. And I got Claude, the AI, to translate this into Vietnamese for Hung, my wife, and she read it and was bouncing around the room in joy that finally here was someone else who's saying the same things that she's feeling, and she didn't know that anyone else is feeling that. As far as I can tell, the women here in Vietnam don't talk about this stuff. They don't share this information with each other. It's very, very private. You don't talk about that sort of stuff. Whereas, Gay putting down in words what she'd been through, and all the different symptoms, hundreds of symptoms, of perimenopause, and my wife reading that for the first time in her language, going, I thought I was the only one. And she was bouncing around the room in joy to know that she wasn't alone, that there was someone else who goes through what she's going through. And so that, in a country that doesn't talk about women's private things, doesn't have the women don't have a language for it. They don't have the cultural opportunity to talk about it. And then you bring that to the medical model, and most doctors here in Vietnam, from what I understand from talking to Vietnamese doctors, most of them don't understand. They've heard the word, and even female doctors, they've heard the word menopause. They've not heard the word perimenopause, but they've heard the word menopause, and only at the very top hospitals, like for example in Saigon or in Hanoi, there are private hospitals for the one percenters, and I'm fortunate to have gone to one of those one percenter hospitals a number of times and built up a rapport with one of the doctors there, who's a cardiologist, who trained in Germany. Vietnamese doctor, trained in Germany as a cardiologist, spent 7 years living in Germany as a cardiologist, married a German, and then came back to Vietnam and now works at this one percenter hospital. And so she understands what menopause and perimenopause is. And as far as she's told me, a number of other staff at that hospital do too. But they're it's a hospital for the one percenters. The general populace have no idea. And the women included have no idea. They've heard the word menopause, have never heard the word perimenopause, have no idea what it means. And so trying to introduce that concept into a country that has no language for it and no cultural opportunity and permission to talk about it is quite difficult. Then it gets on to my particular remit over here as well, one of my life missions, as it were, almost. Well, in fact, yeah, one of my missions is to introduce neurodiversity into this country. And again, the doctors at the one percenters hospitals, they've heard of neurodiversity. They know roughly minor what ADHD is and what autism is, but just like that's a very, very basic understanding. They are aware that the concept exists and they're aware that there are differences. That you bring the word neurodiversity into the conversation and it's a blank look. They have not heard the word and they have no idea what it means. So that when I say, oh, I'm autistic and ADHD, it's kind of like a blank look saying, never heard of that, what's that? And so, trying to introduce that into the one percenter hospitals is a challenge, let alone trying to bring that into a culture that is very rigid with cultural stereotypes and very where we were in the West decades ago. And we still, the West is far from out of those period. it's still only just grappling, and part of that is to do with technology. We've only recently got the technology to be able to look at our wiring while it's working and see what fires up and what doesn't fire up, and whereabouts in our brain those firings happen, and what they mean. So we can now track that there are differences in brain wiring. But that's only 5 years. And we've been talking about difference for decades, but science has been talking about difference. The general populace, no. Everyone's a little bit of, on the spectrum, aren't they? Well, everyone's a little bit autistic, aren't they? Well, these are the common myths, but science is telling us no, that's not the case. But the cultural myths persist. Because like all the best myths, there's an element of truth in it, but the element is small, the untruth is wide, but the element has the power to move from one communicator to the next very rapidly, and so that's how that meme spreads. So there's my challenge. I've got perimenopause, which is an unknown word in this country, and menopause, which is incredibly understood in this country. So trying to bring that in. So, Gay and I are writing a book, and I'm hoping that, once our book is written and it's out there, that I can start giving copies away to, medical people here in Viet Nam, so that they can give copies away to their patients, to their women going through perimenopause, to say, hey, you're not alone. And that there are solutions to this, and the 20-year-old myth of that the solution, hormone replacement therapy gives cancer, still hangs around like a sore thumb, like a sore guest at a party, and it's just not true. It's just not true. But that myth persists. It's a very strong cultural myth. Anyway. So there's the challenge for perimenopause and menopause in this country. And then you add in the wrinkle of neurodiversity in a country. And so, I've got my work cut out for me. And, there are times like last night when my wife and I were talking about this at dinner, I got sad because just the sheer overwhelm of, what the hell am I trying to do? This is a country that is not my country. And I'm trying to introduce a concept that they are not ready for, that they have no language for. And I'm not even from their country. I'm a foreigner and I don't speak their language. And it's incredibly hard to learn. So, you could turn around and say, well, why don't you learn Vietnamese? Mate, you talk to anyone who has tried learning Vietnamese, you talk to any language teacher, even here in Vietnam, the Vietnamese have said, don't bother learning Vietnamese, it's too bloody hard. Just stick with English because we're learning English and we'll figure it out with Google Translate. And like all foreigners in all countries around the world, if you're a foreigner, you're given leeway. The local people, the locals will work with you to try and understand that you're not saying, hey, you look like an elephant, but actually you look beautiful in that dress. So they work with you. You don't have to learn the nuances of this new language. And Vietnamese, because of its tonal differences to Western language, is very difficult to learn. And at 67, bloody very difficult to learn. Okay, so there's the challenge. And I welcome this community here on Substack to be able to guide me in thinking about neurodiversity, because neurodiversity is not just a woman challenge, it's a systemic challenge. It's underreported, it's underappreciated, our workplaces give it lip service at best. The medical community are not trained in it. Like, Gay's doctor, the Gay's doctor, her Gay's GP, has had to learn, even though she's female, has had to learn about perimenopause herself. And both her and Gay have gone through the learnings together because it's such an untaught subject. It's something that women go through, and it's women's problem. And women will deal with it as women do. On their own, they'll sort it out. And there's the trust. But it's like, you don't have to go through this alone. But please if you're a woman going through menopause, perimenopause, please understand that it's not just hitting you, it's hitting everyone that you come into contact with. And some of us are completely blindsided by what you do on a daily and or hourly basis. And the simple things like men need, like I said, men are quite simple to manage. We're easy. But if you come home from work and you're exhausted from work, and we understand that, goodness me, as I say, your body is trying to kill you from the inside. So we understand that you're exhausted. Sometimes we men, we just need a hug, we need a cuddle, we need a hand holding on the couch while we watch Netflix. But we understand eventually, if you tell us, we understand that sometimes your internal batteries are so low that even just holding hands, even just a hug or a cuddle or a smile is beyond you. You simply do not have the energy. It is one more demand on your body that your body just doesn't have the energy to meet. And I understand that. And lots of men do. Most men, if you explain it to them, will understand that and they'll give you leeway. But if you don't explain it, because you haven't got the language to explain it, then yes, it becomes really difficult for everyone. And that's when women ring up into phone lines and report on Substack and various forums that their children no longer love them, their children hate them, and their husbands, they don't understand why their husbands have gone off looking for a BMW and a fast bike and a sports car and a hot model. It's because with the husbands, they're not being liked anymore. So many men are reporting that their wives hate them, and that was true in my marriage. I constantly complained to my wife that it felt like no matter what I did, it was wrong, and I was always wrong, even when I didn't know what I'd done wrong, and she wouldn't explain it to me, but I was wrong, and it was obvious that I was wrong. And so there's that constant walking on eggshells, wondering when am I going to be in trouble next for something I have no idea what I've done. And so perimenopause, that's why we're writing the book, Gay and I, because there is so much information that needs to get out to women and the people that love the women. So much information. So that's why we're writing the book. You add in the wrinkle that I'm here in Viet Nam, where perimenopause is not known as a word, and menopause is so badly understood by everyone that not just the medical community, but everyone. And only the 1%ers understand what it is because their doctors are trained overseas to be able to understand and go through what happens with perimenopause and why HRT works for so many women. Not every woman, but so many women. Anyway, that's my little rant. And then you add in neurodiversity and you can see that, I've got a challenge ahead of me. Anyway, I welcome your views on perimenopause, on neurodiversity, on any of these topics. And if you're thinking, the Filipina thing is too rich for you, and that's sexist, ask a Filipina yourself rather than making that proclamation, and B, do you live here? Because if you don't live in Asia, then you don't know what you're talking about. It is different. It's not just the West with different coloured eyes and shorter and different colour hair. Asia, and I've had to learn this, and I've been here over 12 months now, and I've had to learn this. Southeast Asia is different from the West. The West is not the culture, it's a culture. And the West needs to let go of its the culture lens and embrace the fact that there are different lenses around the world. The West is not the arbiter of all things. It is not the gold standard. There are different cultures with different standards. And so if you want to have a go at me about the Philippines, by all means, please do. But unless you live here, you can just fuck off with your ideas. Anyway, that's me. And I'll leave you now with a song that I wrote back in the 80s and I've remixed into 2026 and I love it. So I'll leave you with that. Until next time, take care and look after yourself and look after those who love you, because we do love you, even though you're going through hell on toast. Okay, bye.
whiskey that's been watered down. I hide my fears in shadows painted on the ground. I'm civilized but compromise my high ideals. I say I think but I've forgotten how it feels. Always thinking of myself, I'm the rational man. I infiltrate and communicate my twisted schemes. I tell the world about my great ideas and dreams. Your brains I steal by mass appeal demographically. I seal your fake by complicated flattery. Always thinking of myself, I'm the rational man. Shores to dominate. You could start a revolt, but that's the chance I take. I'll plot and scheme my master dreamer till it's time to overthrow your overlords and take what's mine. Always thinking of myself, I'm the rational man. Always thinking of myself, I'm the rational man. I drown my tears in whiskey that's been watered down. I hide my fears in the shadows painted on the ground. I'm civilized but compromise my high ideals. I say I think but I've forgotten how it feels. Always thinking of myself, I'm the rational man.